There's obviously many different things that we can focus on in ministry, but one of the basic tensions in ministry focus is between principles and people. And when we talk about people ministry, that's kind of the ministry of presence, like being present with people. Some of us are more oriented toward being present with people, while others tend to be more focused on people being conformed to God's principles. These two things are by no means mutually exclusive, and many people embody both of these things. But that's kind of one of the focus tensions we're going to talk about. Are we more oriented on just being present with people and kind of bringing the presence of God to people, or are we looking to bring people into conformity with God's principles? And that's one of the focus tensions that we're looking at.
So to some degree, to make it too black and white, is it kind of like a grace and truth kind of spectrum a little bit? While we know ultimately biblically those two things go together, but on a spectrum, why sometimes we can be towards truth and about principle, and other times we can be towards grace and presence with people.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy parallel spectrum to look at, or parallel tension to look at. It's not an exact one-to-one just because those are theological terms, so they have a lot more to them than just this. But I do think you're right. I mean, we tend to, when we're focused more on people and being present with them, we tend to function more from a paradigm of the grace. We're leaning more into the theological camp of grace, or the theological container of grace. And then definitely on the principle side, we're going to lean more into the truth side. But then again, there's more to truth than just principles. There's the narrative of Christ and who he is and that sort of thing.
So then on that spectrum, on that scale of focus, we have principle or we have presence. And then what about the motivation, the ministry motivation scale or spectrum? What's that about?
It's important to qualify. There's lots of different ways. When we're talking about motivation, it's essential that we qualify that we're not talking so much today about the specific kinds of things that motivate us in each person. For example, I might get motivated by justice issues, or by making sure that we're righteous, or I might be motivated by like knowledge, having great knowledge, or connecting with people. They're all different things that can motivate me. But I'm on a general spectrum of ministry in general. I'm talking about something a little more broad. So those other things would be a great topic for another day, but this is a more basic question. Am I more motivated to be or to bring Jesus to people in their current state, or to help people move from their current state into the more abundant life that God has for them? Now, let me simplify that to the two words that I want to put as kind of polar parts of the tension. Are we meeting people in the reality of where they are and sitting with them in that place? Or are we seeing the possibility of what they can be and trying to urge them, or encourage them, or strengthen them, or convince them, or whatever, lead them into that place of possibility? So reality or possibility would be the motivational tension. Do I want to meet people in the reality or bring people to their potential?
We have the tension between principle and presence. We have the tension between reality and possibility, right?
It might help us to actually say principle and people. So, principle or people, and then reality and possibility.
That's an interesting tension to think about in our ministries. Does that matter? Like, what do we do with that as we think about that?
That's a great question.
What do we do now if we think about our ministry focus and our ministry motivation?
I mean, I really hope this matters because I don't want to waste everybody's time. I believe this is a really beneficial thing for us to think through. There's a lot of biblical examples around these tensions. One of the biggest reasons to go after this is to think about your leadership, whether and your ministry, whether that's in your home, or at your workplace, or in a church ministry you're running, or in your neighborhood, whatever. Think about your ministry and where you lean on these scales. Nobody's perfectly balanced in the middle of all these, like we all kind of lean one direction or the other. There's a real danger that if I'm only ministering out of my focus and my motivation, that it can be limited, that that ministry is limited at best. And if I'm not aware of it and not working at that, it can become unhealthy. If I'm only leaning on one side of those scales, then the other part's missing. And therefore the fullness of what it looks like to minister to others is creating gaps that can be kind of dangerous gaps for the people who we're ministering to. That's one of the reasons why this really matters, and it makes a big difference.
Could you unpack some of those dangers or some of those gaps that might play out practically in our life? So I'm a pastor. If I'm leaning too much into presence and possibility, like what might that mean as far as I'm trying to help somebody, but how might I actually be not helping them if I'm unbalanced in my focus of ministry and in my motivation of ministry?
Okay, yeah, that's good. Well, why don't we start with the one you talked about? If I'm really high on the presence side, the people side, then that means I'm really just trying, I'm trying to be with people. And I think that this relationship that I'm having with the person is the best thing that I have to offer them, right? Like that's the main thing I have to offer them. And so I'm trying to be very relationally present. But then I don't want people to just sit in the reality of where they are. I want them to be pushed into the possibility of where they could be. So at that intersection of being people focused, but seeing their potential and their possibility. There's also this thing where I can subtly and unintentionally move into a place where I'm over promising them. I'm casting vision. You could be doing this, man. Like God has this on your life. And I get really excited for you. And we dream together and I'm with you and I'm relationally there. But I could end up in a spot where I'm over promising and setting people up for major disappointment in their life because I have a lot of hope for them, but if I'm not leaning into principle, there may be things that are not right in their life yet that are going to keep them from getting to that spot. But I'm not dealing with principle. Or if I'm not sitting with them in the reality of where they are, I'm not seeing the reality of their situation. So I don't understand how much it takes for them to get to the place of possibility. And so I can be have oversight in my mind where I'm not dealing with reality, and I can be not understanding the principle of sowing and reaping, and that there might be changes, principle changes that need to happen in their life. So I might be over promising in that situation where I'm just present with them. I'm really encouraging, but it can lead to being, over promising accidentally because it's not being balanced by reality and by principle. So that's one of those things. And in each of these, we could go a little deeper. I'll just quickly touch on a couple of them. One is, again, say I'm still very much a people focused, relationship focused more than principle, but I'm not trying to just see a person move forward. I really want to just sit with the person where they are, you know. So, this I'm trying to have compassion for them. I'm trying to be present with them. I'm not trying to push them forward or get anything, out of their life. The problem with that is that I can accidentally slide into a place where I'm enabling people, where they're getting from me what they feel like they need, but nothing's actually improving in their life. The principles aren't getting better and they're not moving toward anything further forward. And they're kind of getting more okay with that because they have a good friend who's there. And so that's danger. And in the same way, if I'm sitting with people in reality, but I do have principle, but I'm not really leaning into presence or relationship. I'm just looking at their reality. I'm like, oh, I see your reality. And that's a tough reality. And I'm seeing the principles in your life. And it's like, oh, that's really tough. I don't know how you would overcome that. Like, like yeah, these things in your life are not good, but I don't know how to help you move forward, or I'm not trying to get you to move forward. And I'm not even trying to be that present with you. I'm just trying to sit in that space and see where you are so you see that someone else sees you. That at best can be, Job's friends coming alongside of him to lament his situation with him. But at worst, it can get to a spot where it's commiserating. And that means that I'm just sitting there being miserable with you, and I'm not doing anything to actually encourage you or to give you hope, and that can be a real dangerous thing. And I'll touch on just the last intersection, which would be if I'm a principle oriented person. In other words, I'm trying to bring people into the principles of God, and I see possibility and potential for their life. Now I'm a person who I'm like, I'm looking at you and I'm saying, look, if you would just fix these things in your life, then you'd be able to get here, you know? And sometimes it really lacks compassion. It lacks reality of some of the deeper systemic issues that that person's dealing with, the situational issues they're dealing with. And that can lead us to a place where we're just shaming people, where we're saying, your life could be this if you would just do this. And then the person doesn't walk away having steps to actually improving. Instead, they just start to be like, "Ah, I'm never going to get there, because I'm never going to be that good." And they function more in shame.
So, as a local church ministry leader, as a pastor, I can see in different types of relationships me going into some of those things unintentionally, where I'm either commiserating with somebody or shaming somebody and trying to bring truth. So, it's one thing for me to like sit with those things and be aware and acknowledge those things. But then what are like some steps, some just really basic steps to start that as we're kind of assessing our ministry, assessing our focus in our ministry and our motivation? What's a way to avoid those pitfalls, though? What are ways to avoid those dangers so that we can minister more effectively?
The point of this teaching is not to be critical or to be negative of ourselves or of others. The point is to locate ourselves and be self-aware so that we can find ways to more holistically minister. So, firstly, we need to acknowledge that we're not going to get it, that we're not going to be perfect. Even within our lane, we're not going to be perfect. Even within our focus and our motivation, we're still not going to get that perfect, let alone be able to function outside of our focus and outside of our motivation. The first thing is to not let the fear of getting it wrong stop us from ministering. So when we are aware, man, I'm not very good at that, don't let that stop us like, oh, I'm going to mess up the people I'm ministering to. No, 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 no. God's called you to minister knowing your limitations. Remember, God intentionally limits each of us. We only get certain gifts and certain motivations because it takes the whole body of Christ. Secondly, we're going to acknowledge our weak spots. We acknowledge that we're not going to get it perfect, but we're going to keep ministering. But then we're going to acknowledge where our weaknesses actually are. If possible, we name them when it's appropriate to those we're ministering to. So if I'm in a relationship with a person or I'm in teaching someone something or instructing them, if we have good self-awareness of what we're not good at, we're going to tell the people we're ministering to, hey, I just want you to know, like, I'm going to be here for you, but I have a hard time speaking truth. So there may be things that you need to hear that I'm just not the person who's really good at confrontation. And there may be hard things you need to hear that I'm if either not even seeing in you, because I always see the best in people. Or it might be that you're a principle oriented person and you're just going to say, look, I really struggle with empathy. I really struggle with relationship, and I don't want to stop helping you. So like if I'm going to be offensive or anything like that, I want to like just name that ahead of time so that you can be aware that that's a weak spot. So firstly, we're acknowledging we're not going to get it perfect and we're going to continue ministering. Secondly, we're acknowledging our weak spots, naming them when it's appropriate to the people we're ministering to. And then as a result of being aware of our weak spots, we're also going to find partners. And this is important. When you look at how Jesus partners off the 12 disciples, and how he partners Paul with people, typically you look at those people and you're like, they're different from one another. The Apostle John and the Apostle Peter, they're almost like fully represent the picture of relationship and principle, you know? And over time, you watch as John matures, and by the time he's writing some of his stuff, you hear a lot more principle. But John's definitely a relationship guy, and Peter, right from the beginning, is a principle guy, and it's obvious. But Jesus partners them together for good reason. And so it's good to say, to understand this and have it not be a thing that takes us out, but instead says, who do I need to partner with? And it might be difficult to partner with the people who bring the other thing. And that's good tension for us to have. So that's the third thing, is to find the right partners. And then here's the most important thing. If you don't hear anything else from the podcast, please hear this. The most important thing to recognize when we see this whole kind of spectrum of ministry focus and ministry motivation, the most important thing is that we recognize that what people mostly need is not me. What they mostly need is not just another person. What people mostly need is the person of Jesus Christ. Our goal is to get people reliant and dependent on Jesus. We're trying to introduce people consistently, even people who have had a long-standing relationship with Jesus. Our goal is each day to reintroduce them to Jesus as we minister. We want people reintroducing us to Jesus on a regular basis so that we're saying, right, when he's here, when Christ is here, it provides relationship and principle. It deals with reality and it moves me toward possibility. When we look at Christ in the Gospels, we see someone who fully embodies all of this all the time. And so, as ministers of the gospel of Jesus, our primary thing is we're speaking the good news about Jesus. We are living the good news about Jesus. We're relating to people with the good news of Jesus. We're bringing the good news of Jesus to the reality of where they are, and we're inviting them into the possibilities that come from the gospel of Jesus. Everything is about Jesus. And so we're saying, if you can get connected to Jesus, he's the healer, not me. He's the transforming power, not me. He's the perfectly faithful friend, not me. That's the primary way that we find ourselves protected and more well-rounded is when we say, I need to be partnered with others who are unlike me, and we together need to introduce people to the person of Jesus. So we're partnering together to help people encounter and experience the presence and the truth of the gospel of Jesus.